My name is Jennifer Kajiyama Tinkham. I'm a adjunct faculty here at BYU Hawaii, and I'm one of the advisors for the Religious Freedom and Human Dignity Initiative on campus. I have the privilege of introducing our introducer of our keynote speaker, and I will share a little bit about the Honorable Matt Salmon, and after anyway, they'll go on and proceed with the things I prepared. But it is an honor and privilege to have you all here, and truly appreciate all those who have presented thus far. All right, the Honorable Matt Salmon brings over 4 decades of distinguished experience in the public and private sectors. With a solid foundation in telecom, Matt has transitioned to a notable political career and served 4 years in the Arizona State Senate and 10 years as a United States representative. During his tenure in Congress, he was an active member of the United States House of Representatives Foreign Affairs Committee, notably serving as chairman of both the Western Hemisphere and the Asia Pacific subcommittees. His commitment to global cooperation and human rights were further exemplified by his leadership, being the chairman of the Human Rights Committee at the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, or the OSCE, which focuses on security and cooperation in Eastern Europe. Beyond his political and professional endeavors, Matt has demonstrated a profound dedication to humanitarian causes, notably with 25 years on the board of Child Help USA, a nonprofit organization dedicated to the prevention and treatment of child abuse and human trafficking. Matt also serves as a special advisor to the Arizona State University on international matters.
Thank you so much. Ladies and gentlemen, fellow presenters, brothers and sisters, hermanos y hermanas, shongme. That's Chinese, Mandarin. I served my mission in Taiwan, and that's up, brothers and sisters, for those of you that don't speak Mandarin. I'm sorry, I don't speak any of the other languages, or I'd throw in all the rest too. It's my privilege to introduce Chief Justice Robert Torres. He was appointed to the Supreme Court of Guam in 2004. He's not only served with distinction, but is also currently in his 3rd term. His leadership extends beyond the courtroom, as he's an active member of the Pacific Judicial Council and has held prestigious positions such as past president of the American Judges Association and a member of its executive committee and board of governors. Chief Justice Torres' commitment to justice is further highlighted by his membership in the National Asian Pacific Bar Association's Judicial Council, a proud alumnus of the University of Notre Dame and Harvard Law School. He's also been honored with doctorates of laws from the University of Cebu and Centro Escolar University, Makati. On a personal note, Chief Justice Torres is happily married to the Honorable Senator Mary Camacho Torres, and they are the proud parents of 3 children, grandparents of 11 children. And by the way, I've got to tell you, Chief Justice, Wayne Gretzky had the best ever comment on grandchildren. He said that grandchildren is your reward for not killing your kids. Please join me in welcoming a true advocate for justice and human rights, Chief Justice Robert Torres.
Hafide, Bula, Talofa, Malo Elele, Kia ora, kia orana, and aloha.
Aloha.
Thank you, Congressman Salmon. Someone said you've made it when the person who introduces you also gets an introduction. So, but it is a privilege and an honor for me to have been introduced to you. And I want to thank Brigham Young University, the International Center for Law and Religion Studies, and the J. Reuben Clark Law School for bringing us together for this timely discussion. The institutions that we serve thrive on BYU's commitment to protect the freedom of thought, conscience, and religion across the world. 75 years have passed since the Universal Declaration of Human Rights enshrined human dignity as the foundation of freedom, justice, and peace in the world. Yet, despite its celebrated history, the concept of dignity remains as dynamic and contested as ever. What defines dignity? How do we perceive and apply it across different contexts? In the courtroom, in the classroom, in our everyday lives? Is it shaped more by individual freedoms or our collective values? What happens when one person's dignity conflicts with that of another? These questions, I think, point to the enduring challenge of applying such an abstract concept to life and law. Our exploration of dignity often leads us back to foundational texts, like the book of Genesis, which many people talked about, which asserts that all people are created in the image of God, endowed with intrinsic and immutable dignity. Yet, if dignity is inherent, society must play a role in defending it. As Gilbert Chesterton once said, a London poet and author, when people begin to ignore human dignity, it will not be long before they begin to ignore human rights. This is the lens through which we must examine the relationship between dignity and the rights of Pacific peoples today. So now you get a chance to actually participate. Hopefully it keeps you awake during this keynote portion of the speech. So the first is, what do you consider to be the most pressing human rights issue in your country or jurisdiction today? And the poll should be active now, so you'll be able to chime in. You can enter one more answers in there, and we'll leave it open for like a minute or so, and let's see what people think. People are typing in their responses. Immigration, minority rights, the right to life, a hot topic across not only the Pacific, but in climate change, the value of a woman, immigration is a big issue, religious freedom, prisoners, women's autonomy, racism. So you can see employment, abuse of government power, access to resources. So you can see all of these different human rights issues that are coming up. Now, how effectively do you believe your government is in upholding and protecting human rights? Are they very effective, somewhat effective, not very effective, or not at all? And you can see it's pretty split in terms of between not at all and very effective. And most people are getting sort of a lukewarm, somewhat effective upholding and protecting of human rights within their jurisdictions. And then, this is the hardest question perhaps, other than the next one that I'll ask you, but and that is, what actions are needed, do you think, to most effectively address human rights challenges in your country? What do you think needs to be done? Involve the people, grassroots efforts maybe, education, oh, their grassroots just popped up, cooperation, collaboration, investment. Education's a big one, and this is a word cloud, so as multiple answers come in, it sort of shows up by the bigger word that's here. So, and those are excellent suggestions. And here's the last question, and many of you might know this, and my talk will touch a bit about this, and maybe you don't. And what is the United States' only incorporated territory? What is the United States? Whoops, I pulled it out. You can see it in the poll. And a switch.
Starts with a G and ends with an A.
It's interesting. People are choosing Guam based on the speaker. American Samoa, No one chose Ellis Island? All right, we'll get to the answer for that soon. And that was a chance for you to win a weekend stay for two at the Guam Hilton Resort and Spa if you got that answer right. Airfare's not included, though. So, despite the Universal Declaration's milestone anniversary, I think we still understand that violations of human rights continue across the globe. In Pacific communities, we've seen the answers. Populations face existential threats, such as climate change, immigration, geopolitical strife, unchecked power. Throughout our time together, I aim to discuss some of these challenges and illustrate why a nuanced understanding of dignity and rights in our region is not merely theoretical, but is of urgent practical importance. A critical aspect of our dialogue today, from my perspective, will involve the insular cases, a series of United States Supreme Court decisions that still define America's relationship with its territories, such as my home island of Guam. Those cases established a framework for unequal constitutional treatment based on an outdated distinction between incorporated and unincorporated territories. And that framework allowed for discrimination that affects every aspect of life in these territories, from political representation to eligibility for federal programs. As one indigenous Chamorro author wrote, "We are forced to find our way in a country that neither wants us nor wants to let us go." Guam's relationship with the United States is complicated and full of contradictions. It's born out of the phrase that we are foreign in the domestic sense. Now make sense of that. The phrase foreign in a domestic sense was coined by the US Supreme Court in the case of Downs v. Bidwell, the first of a handful of Supreme Court decisions that are known as the insular cases between 1901 to 1922. And that came on the heels of the colonial acquisitions of Puerto Rico, Guam, the Philippines, and Cuba as spoils of the Spanish-American War. These decisions justified the new US imperialist stance and established a framework of unequal constitutional treatment in the territories. Downs was written by Justice Brown, who was the author of the now infamous Plessy v. Ferguson decision, which found that separate but equal was constitutional. And Downs created a legal fiction that distinguished between incorporated and unincorporated territories. That decision had no legal precedent, and it worked really some interpretive violence upon the US Constitution in the name of colonial enterprise. It held that Congress has plenary power over the territories under Article 4 of the Constitution, and because of that, it has the authority to apply the Constitution at will to the territories. Before Downs, territories automatically had all the constitutional rights and privileges afforded to those in the mainland. But under this new category of unincorporated territories, they now get what Congress gives. The court reasoned that, and this is where the hurtful language comes in, reasoned that applying the Constitution made sense if the territory was contiguous, like Arizona or New Mexico before they were incorporated into the country. But it was contiguous territories inhabited only by people of the same race or by scattered bodies of native Indians. But it would not do for islands inhabited by alien races, differing from us in religion, customs, laws, methods of taxation, and modes of thought. They concluded that the administration of government and justice according to Anglo-Saxon principles, may for a time be impossible. In short, we were an uncivilized race, unfit for citizenship. This is usually the point I put up a picture of my family and say, do they look uncivilized? Throughout the insular cases, the justices debated how much the Constitution applied in each of these unincorporated territories. Usually it was a 5-4 decision, so it was very close. But each holding inevitably reinforced and refined the central holding of Downs, that the Constitution doesn't apply to territories by its own force, and the Constitution doesn't follow the flag. We fly the flag of the United States, but the Constitution doesn't apply in its entirety. The final of the insular cases, Balzac v. Puerto Rico, held that the right to a jury trial was not a fundamental constitutional right. And it's emblematic of everything that's wrong with with the insular cases. And it's been nearly 120 years since the unincorporated term was enshrined, and I told you I'd give you that answer. It's not Guam that's the only incorporated territory. The only incorporated territory is Palmyra Atoll, which is an atoll off of Hawaii. It was part of the Hawaiian chain when Hawaii was incorporated, but did not become a statehood. But Palmyra is uninhabited, so it is the only one where the Constitution applies, but no one can benefit from it. The repercussions of the insular cases, and I see it's 5 minutes, and I'm going to take the liberty of the chair to go beyond, because stop means to start, keep going. The repercussions of the insular cases extend far beyond political representation. I mean, I don't have a right to vote. We have a non-voting delegate in the House of Representatives, and the catch-22 is they can only vote in Congress if Congress gives them the right to vote. But it also affects people's lives. I want to give you a specific example of the human costs associated with territorial status. And this is two twin sisters, Katrina and Leslie, who were living in Pennsylvania, and they both suffered from myotonic dystrophy, which significantly impairs muscle function. When their mother passed away, they were faced with a tough reality. Leslie, who the disease did not affect as significantly as Katrina, could live with assisted living in an independent facility. Katrina could not. And Katrina's only living relative had moved to Guam, married a doctor who was native to Guam. And while her twin sister, Leslie, while they both received SSI benefits when they lived in Pennsylvania, when Katrina went to Guam, she lost her benefits. And she tried to fight a legal battle. While her benefits were still pending, she passed away. So their insular cases and the legal offspring really are embedded in the territory's exclusions from critical federal programs, and will continue to struggle to find solutions from political leaders. And as the Brown versus Board of Education helped pave the way for civil rights in the states, we hope that overturning at least the insular cases' hurtful and harmful language will create opportunities for meaningful democratic changes in the territories. There are still 3 unincorporated territories. American Samoa has no enabling act that gives them citizenship, unlike Guam and the Northern Marianas, and they're wary of having the Constitution fully apply in American Samoa because it may interfere with some of their traditional governments and governance systems. The dynamic that Guam has, and even though we have the longest relationship with the United States, there are federal decisions that are made that impact local interests without necessarily local consent. And I think the most recent military buildup that's occurring in Guam because of the threats from China and North Korea, I think signifies that. There are plans to relocate a Marine contingent from Okinawa, building new housing, community, a live firing range. But we also come from an era where the US, particularly the US military, wasn't the most responsible person for disposing of herbicides like Agent Orange or radioactive contamination, as we know from the marshals. They've tried to step up and answer their responsibilities, but there's still a way to go to address some of those questions. We're going to have our population increase significantly with the Marines that are coming and the workers that are associated with it. And with that, we expect to see rises of caseloads and individuals that seek justice service. But across the broader Blue Pacific continent, as we have indicated in some of the responses, nations face the stark realities of climate change, driven by shifting geopolitics. Islands like Nauru, Kiribati, Tuvalu, Fiji, Tonga, Marshalls, almost all of us confront rising sea levels that threaten our very existence, a potentially displacing residents and making us refugees without a home. Current scientific projections suggest that global temperatures will exceed critical thresholds very soon, with as much as potentially 1 million people being displaced by 2050 due to climate impacts. Secretary General Guterres has described this as a mass exodus of populations on a biblical scale, emphasizing, though, that the loss of homes should not mean the loss of human rights. And our islands all face these challenges, and we realize that our local resources will be overwhelmed. Despite contributing minimally to climate change, we are on the front line of battling its consequences. Urgent, decisive, and transformative action is required to address these threats. They're not looming in the distant future. They're on our doorsteps and on our shores today. Sustainable development is more, though, than just environmental stewardship. It's a matter of human rights. The heart of a mission is to ensure that everyone has access to education, healthcare, economic opportunities. You saw those responses in the poll questions. A few weeks ago, our university led the Conference on Island Sustainability for government and academic leaders across the Pacific. It was to reinforce our commitment to a world where environmental well-being and human dignity go hand in hand. And as guardians of fundamental right, it's the judiciary's responsibility to make sure that justice is accessible to everyone, especially those who find it hard to reach. And that's why we're continuing to update our technology and provide service to all who come, and to become an anchor institution in any digital progress that is made throughout the island. But another critical issue that demands our continued focus is the rights and representation of women. We've heard that this morning. We saw that in the polling questions as well. Several states in the Pacific, regretfully, exhibit the world's lowest levels of women's political representation, with women occupying less than 7% of political seats. Our island, fortunately, stands as a commendable exception, with key leadership roles held by our governor, who's woman, our speaker, and an associate justice on our Supreme Court. But despite our matrilineal heritage and strong female representation in formal power structures, significant challenges exist. Guam has the second highest number of sexual assaults per capita in the nation, and has one of the highest teen pregnancy rates. It's a crisis that's compounded by a lack of prenatal care and physicians who specialize in OBs. Additional family violence remains one of the most frequently charged offenses each year. Global studies have shown there's a correlation between domestic violence and child abuse, and I think we recognize this as well. Every day we see children who are affected by abuse or neglect, many lingering in the system for years. And so we've had to try and address it. We've convened a juvenile justice and child welfare collaborative, pulling from all different agencies, and our hope is that we can build off the work we did before and create enduring change in the lives of children who find themselves in our court. Human trafficking is also an issue in the Pacific Islands, and it presents a harrowing scene of exploitation that erodes the dignity of countless individuals. The grim reality is characterized by forced labor and sexual exploitation, particularly targeting women and children in tourist-frequented areas and urban areas. The UN Office on Drugs and Crimes highlights that these islands serve not only from local trafficking, but as a launch pad to send people to other regions in Oceania and Southeast Asia. Children are particularly vulnerable, often coerced into domestic servitude, commercial sexual exploitation, and other labor-intensive activities such as street vending and agricultural work. And despite these disturbing insights, much of the information on these networks remains sparse, and many of them involve lone opportunists or small groups, and they're noted for masking their trafficking operations behind legitimate recruiting or migration agencies. And we also don't have sufficient resources for in-depth collection and research on these issues, leaving many potential victims perhaps being unseen. So from the shadows cast by the insular cases to the pressing threats of climate change to the dark undercurrent of domestic violence and human trafficking, we see how deeply the concept of dignity is intertwined with the Pacific's past, its present, and its future. These aren't abstract issues relegated to the annals of history. They are immediate challenges that demand our attention. They demand our action. And our leaders cannot just stand by. Every day, our judiciary works with community partners to mobilize resources, enhance protective efforts, and harness expertise. But these challenges are bigger than just one branch or one island to handle alone. They're regional issues that need regional solutions. Whether it's fighting for the rights of those in the territories to be seen as equals under the law, protecting our environment for future generations, or ensuring that no human being is reduced to a commodity, our commitment to dignity is what defines us. And I ask my brothers and sisters across Oceania to let this be a call to action for all of us today, to carry forward the torch of justice and to be bearers of change that honors the depth of our humanity, our dignity. Sidus Masi, thank you, and mahalo. I know there were a couple of questions actually quite a lot of questions that came in here, that was in here, and let me go back to it. And there were a number of ones that came in, and it says, how is the concept of human dignity factored into decision making in your courts? And I think I touched on that a little bit in my speech when I talked about it, and I didn't, because of the timekeepers putting pressure on me, I kind of skipped over some of the details. But I talked about some of the programs that we have initiated with our community partners to address some of these issues, particularly in the juvenile justice and in the mental health arena, joining the Department of Youth Affairs, Child Protective Services, to focus on, for example, juvenile referral status, diversionary programs, dual status youth, and also looking at data collection. I think all too often we make decisions in a vacuum without appropriate data to support your decision making. And I think it's important to get the data to know what you're doing is working, to have measurables on there. So I hope that answered that question. One of the other questions is, what's been the biggest challenge to human dignity in your work? Well, I pointed out, at least for the territories and those that are territories of the United States who are still unincorporated and don't have the full panoply of constitutional rights, we're still struggling to find equal footing within the nation. It has created issues. I gave a specific example of how it really hurt this family. And they were fortunate that the husband was a surgeon, very well off, who could afford to pay for the care of Katrina. But really, should it have come down to that? What if it wasn't a person who could do that? Why would she have been denied those benefits when, if she was living in Pennsylvania, she would have been allowed them? And it sort of goes to voting. If anyone who's a resident of the U.S. and has a right to vote for the President of the United States now moves to Guam, you will lose that right to vote for president. But if you move to Italy, a foreign country, you can still vote. So don't worry about that. Does that make any sense? No, absolutely not. So how does human dignity factor into Guam's self-determination and decolonization process? A very sensitive issue. We actually have never had the right of self-determination. I pointed out Guam became a possession of the United States as part of the Spanish-American War. The CNMI, whose people are the same people as us, Chamorro people, the northern part of the Mariana Islands, Guam is the largest of the Mariana Islands, they were under Japan's rule post-World War I, Germany, and then became Japan. So they became a trustee of the United States under the UN trusteeship. So they were entitled to political self-determination, as were many of the islands out there, were the Micronesian Islands. They voted to enter into a compact of free association with the US, which they just renewed recently. Palau became an independent nation, but also entered into a compact with the US for security and financial aid. The Marshall Islands became an independent country, but also still had a compact with the United States that provides financial support, military, and aid as well. So they all had rights of self-determination. Guam has not. And we were occupied by the Japanese in World War II. So many of the people who lived through that era have great allegiance to the United States. They recognize the brutality of the Japanese occupation and the squelching of the freedoms that people enjoyed, and wanted a closer political relationship with the United States. And if you ask people from that era, 99% of them would say they wanted statehood. But nothing has moved as far as political self-determination. And so now you're getting to see a larger set of the community become disgruntled and feeling disenfranchised and not having a role and looking more towards independence. But of course, that's very unlikely because, as you know, under the Constitution of the United States and Congress's plenary power, they can do what they want with Guam. If the United States feels they want to sell Guam tomorrow to China to retire its national debt, they could. Of course, that won't happen. It's strategically too important. People used to say to me, Guam is in the middle of nowhere. And I'd say to them, no, Guam is in the middle of everywhere. Because if you look at a woman's fan, think about a woman's fan, Guam is 4 hours to mainland China, 4 hours to Korea, 4 hours to Australia, 5 hours to Malaysia, Thailand, 3 hours to Japan, 3 hours to the Philippines. So within a short time, you can be almost anywhere within Asia. And so I think our self-determination, that jury is still out, and we don't know where it will take us. I can only say that I think as more years pass, I think there's going to be less people who, without a formal political solution, who will continue to espouse for a closer political relationship with the United States. We were supposed to have a referendum, but they challenged the referendum was only going to include those people who were on Guam before Harry Truman signed the Organic Act back in 1950, granting people on Guam U.S. citizenship. But it is a second-class U.S. citizenship. It's not granted by the Constitution. It's granted by a congressional act. And so if Congress decides they want to revoke that, they can. They've got the power to do so. And in fact, for tax purposes, for example, if you are born solely by reason of birth within Guam, you're treated as a non-resident alien for purposes of the U.S. estate and gift tax. So, but the referendum didn't proceed because a voter in Guam challenged the exclusion of those born after 1950. He said, I was a resident of Guam, even though I wasn't in Guam before citizenship was granted, I want a right to vote, and it was struck down under equal protection. Now, if Congress was to authorize such a vote, it would, I think, pass constitutional muster, but Congress has not taken the steps to do so. There were a bunch more questions here, but I'm getting evil eyes from the timekeepers. So I think that we'll stop at this moment. But thank you very much.